My name is Simone Carter. I am 36 years old and I work as a senior financial forensics consultant at one of the most respected advisory firms in Charlotte, North Carolina. My entire professional life rests on a single ability: locating the truth buried inside financial data. I can examine a spreadsheet the way most people read expressions on a face, and I have never once overlooked a deception. But the greatest financial risk I ever encountered had nothing to do with any client. It had everything to do with my older brother, Darnell. The day before yesterday, Darnell gambled with his own children's safety because he simply could not tolerate hearing the word no from his younger sister. He loaded all 3 of his kids into a rideshare and dispatched them across the city to my former address, a house I had quietly sold 4 months prior so that he and his wife could travel to Scottsdale, Arizona for a luxury spa getaway he absolutely could not afford. He was fully convinced I would fold. I always had in the past. What he had no way of knowing was that a retired Navy Master Chief named Gerald Pwitt now occupied that address. A man who irons his bed linens, installs motion-activated floodlights on every corner of his property, and keeps a handwritten sign on his gate reading that trespassers will be documented and prosecuted. And Darnell certainly never anticipated that his arrogance would land him in handcuffs the instant his sandals touched the terminal floor in Phoenix. The whole ordeal began at 5:15 on a humid Thursday morning in August. I was standing inside my walk-in closet, carefully packing a carry-on for a flight to Boston. My firm had been nurturing a major merger deal for 11 months, and I was leading the final due diligence presentation. This trip was non-negotiable. My phone lit up before I could zip the bag closed. Only one person calls before sunrise without sending a text first. Darnell. I let it ring twice before answering on speaker. He said, "Simone, good, you're up." He never said hello. He never did. He told me he and Priya had finally booked that Scottsdale trip for their anniversary and that their flight left at noon. He said they would need me to take the kids for the weekend and that drop-off would be around 4. He told me to make sure I had the Lunchables Jordan liked, not the pizza kind, the turkey ones. He mentioned Jordan had been going through a phase. I stopped folding the clothes in my hands. I kept my voice completely flat. I told him I could not watch the children. I was leaving for Boston in 4 hours and would not be in the state. He laughed, that dismissive exhaled sound that meant he had already concluded I was performing. He said my mother had mentioned I finished the Henderson account the week before. He accused me of still being upset about Thanksgiving. I told him I was not lying and that this had nothing to do with Thanksgiving. I told him I was travelling to Boston for work and that even if I were not, the answer would still be no. I said he had not asked me ahead of time and that he could not call me at 5 in the morning and assign me a full weekend of childcare. He told me it was just 3 kids for 3 days and said I had that whole house to myself with all those empty rooms. Then he said the part I have never forgotten. He said, I had been alone so long I had forgotten what it meant to be part of a family. I tightened my grip on the blouse I was folding. I told him clearly not to bring the children to my house because there would be no one there to receive them. He let out a long theatrical sigh and told me he would instruct the driver to drop them at 4 and that if I wanted to play games and leave them sitting on the porch, that was on me. He said he had a flight to catch. Then he hung up. What Darnell did not know, what no one in my family knew, was that I had sold that house 4 months earlier. After what happened at Christmas, I made a decision in absolute silence and told no one. The previous Christmas, I had flown home from a conference in Seattle and walked into my own house at 11 at night to find that my mother had given Darnell a spare key for emergencies, and Darnell had used it to host a watch party for 12 of his friends. There were strangers in my kitchen. One of them was standing on my balcony in the rain, smoking a cigar. The custom wool area rug I had spent 4 months saving to purchase had a burn mark the size of a fist in its centre. When I confronted my mother Renata about it, she told me I was being materialistic. When I asked Darnell to replace the rug, my father Winston said I was making money more important than people. When I pointed out that people who respected each other did not destroy each other's belongings, both of them went quiet in that practiced way that meant the conversation had ended and I had lost. That night I called a real estate agent. The house sold in 6 days. I moved into a secured high-rise in Charlotte's South End, 15th floor, key fob elevator, a concierge desk, and security cameras at every entrance. I placed the deed under an LLC I had formed, called Ironwood Properties. My name appeared nowhere in the public record. I told no one. I continued meeting my family at restaurants and visiting their homes. They were so absorbed in their own lives that not one of them ever asked why I had stopped hosting gatherings. I opened the family group chat and typed clearly that Darnell should know for the record that I was at the airport flying to Boston for work, that I no longer lived at the Briarwood address, that he should not send the children there, that I was not available that weekend, and that this was my final notice. My mother responded within 60 seconds, telling me to stop being selfish, that my brother needed this break, that Priya had been under tremendous stress, that I could go to Boston any time, and that family comes first. My father responded that I was being incredibly childish and asked me to help my family since Darnell was the father of my nieces and nephew. I took screenshots of everything, time-stamped them all, and saved them to my cloud storage. Then I boarded my flight. At 4 that afternoon, while I was somewhere over Virginia, a rideshare driver named Terence pulled up to 2714 Briarwood Lane with 3 children in the back seat. Jordan, age 10, Aaliyah, age 8, and little Chloe, age 5, clutching a stuffed elephant named Peanut. The neighbourhood had transformed since I lived there. My garden was gone. The welcome mat and wind chimes were gone. In their place were precisely trimmed hedges, a gravel path cut into clean lines, and a gate with a laminated notice stating no soliciting, no trespassing, and that all visitors must be announced. Terence unlocked the doors. He looked at the dark house. He looked at the 3 children. He looked at the dark house again. Jordan climbed out first. He was old enough to sense that something was wrong. He rang the doorbell anyway, then rang it again, then knocked. Inside, Master Chief Gerald Pwitt was in his study going through VA paperwork. He was a man who had spent 28 years in the United States Navy across 3 deployments. He did not believe in coincidences, and he did not welcome surprises. When his security monitor showed movement at the front gate, he went to the door. The storm that had been gathering all afternoon had finally broken, with sheets of rain driven sideways by gusting wind. He opened the door. Jordan looked up expecting any face he recognised. Instead, he found himself looking at a broad-shouldered man in his 60s with the posture of a flagpole and eyes that had witnessed things Jordan could not yet imagine. All 3 children screamed. To his enormous credit, Gerald Pwitt did not panic. He looked at the suitcases. He looked at the soaking, wet stuffed elephant. He looked at the 10-year-old, positioning himself in front of his little sisters. He asked the children who they were. Jordan managed to say his name and explain they were looking for their Aunt Simone, that she lived there. Pwitt's jaw tightened. He confirmed he knew the name Simone Carter and told the boy that Simone Carter had sold him the house 4 months ago. Jordan's face drained of colour. Pwitt stepped back and opened the door wide. telling all three of them to get inside before they caught pneumonia and to move. They shuffled in. He locked the door, looked at the three soaked and shivering children standing in his foyer, and felt a rage in his chest that he had not experienced since his final deployment. Someone had placed minors in a car, told the driver to leave, and gone on vacation. He picked up the phone and dialed 911. I landed at Logan Airport to 41 missed calls. My mother, my father, Darnell 14 times, and a voicemail from a Charlotte Police Department detective that made my stomach drop. I stood in the jetway and played it twice. I called my attorney, Patricia Wynn, meticulous, relentless, and worth every cent, and told her to meet me at the precinct. Then I booked the next flight back to Charlotte. The last-minute seat cost me $5,800. I did not hesitate. I spent the flight organising evidence, pulling timestamps, deed transfer records, and the family group chat screenshots. By the time the wheels touched down, I had a complete file assembled. Patricia met me at baggage claim and briefed me as we walked. Darnell and Priya had been arrested at Phoenix Sky Harbor the moment they landed. 2 counts each of child abandonment, 2nd degree, reckless endangerment. They were being flown back in custody. My parents were at the precinct attempting to access the children, but CPPS was blocking them pending investigation. The precinct smelled of stale coffee and fluorescent lighting. In the lobby, my parents stood like offended diplomats. My mother in her best church coat, my father jabbing his finger at the desk sergeant as if he owned the building. When I walked through the door, the noise stopped. My mother's expression curdled. My father said there she was. There was the reason all of this had happened. I told him I had the messages and that he had lied. My mother stepped toward me, hissing that I had hidden the sale of the house and had set Darnell up, that I had wanted him to fail. My father raised his hand. Patricia stepped between us before it could descend. She did not raise her voice. She simply told my father he was standing inside a police station and that if he touched her client, she would have him in handcuffs before that hand came down. He lowered it slowly, glanced at the officers watching from behind the desk, and straightened his collar. My father said I had ruined his son's life. My mother sobbed that Darnell had only wanted one weekend. I told them he had abandoned his children in a storm, and that was not my doing. That night, my parents came to my hotel room. I let them in because I needed to understand exactly how far they were willing to go. Before I opened the door, I launched the voice memo app on my phone and slid it into my robe pocket. They asked me to alter my statement to the prosecutor. They wanted me to claim it had been a miscommunication, that I had agreed to watch the kids and simply forgotten. They said the felony charge would disappear, that Darnell would pay a fine and return home. Then my mother said the thing that permanently severed something inside me. She told me so what if I lost my job, that I was a smart woman and could find work anywhere, but that Darnell had a wife and children and carried the family's name. She said my career was all I had because I had chosen ambition over a real life and that he could not have a felony record because it would destroy him. She said it was my duty. I told them I would be at the courthouse in the morning. They left, convinced they had won. I called Patricia and told her to prepare a motion for emergency custody and to add the recording to the evidence file. Then I went to sleep. It was the best rest I had experienced in years. In court, my parents petitioned for emergency kinship guardianship. My father stood before the judge with the confidence of a man who had never been caught and declared that he and my mother owned their home outright. A 4-bedroom house on Callaway Drive valued at over $700,000, and that they had the financial stability to take the children immediately. What he had not counted on was that I already knew the truth. 3 years earlier, Darnell had accumulated $47,000 in gambling debt. My father had taken out a second mortgage, drained his retirement account, and wiped out his savings to cover it. The house had fallen into foreclosure 18 months after that, 2 weeks before a scheduled lockout. I had intervened anonymously through a holding company I quietly formed called Cedarwood Trust, LLC. I purchased the house at auction. I covered their property taxes. I allowed them to remain rent-free and hired a management company to handle the paperwork so my name never surfaced. I did it because I could not watch my parents become homeless. Even after everything, I was the very reason they still had a roof over their heads, and my father had just lied about owning it under oath. I stood up. I presented the deed. I presented the foreclosure records. I presented the lease agreement they had both signed, which contained a clause stating that any harassment, coercion, or illegal conduct directed at the landlord constituted immediate grounds for termination. Then I played the recording. My mother's voice filled the courtroom, saying it was just a job, that Darnell carried a legacy, that it was my duty. The courtroom went silent in a way that felt geological, as though the ground itself had shifted beneath everyone present. I stated that effective immediately I was terminating their tenancy, that I was serving notice of eviction, that as of that day they had no legal right to occupy that property, no assets, and no stable residence, and therefore could not be granted custody of the children. My father lunged forward, had to be physically restrained by the bailiff, and was removed from the courtroom still screaming. The petition was denied. Darnell received 14 months in the county correctional facility, 3 years of probation, a felony record, and 500 hours of community service. Priya served 6 months of house arrest and filed for divorce the morning of sentencing, sliding the papers across the defence table without once looking at him. The children were placed with a woman named Constance, a distant cousin on my mother's side who had always been quietly pushed to the margins of our family for having the habit of saying truthful things aloud. She was a middle school art teacher in Raleigh, with a small yard, a gentle dog, and an abundance of patience. Through Patricia's office, I established an anonymous trust called the Clearwater Education Fund, providing full tuition coverage, a monthly household stipend for Constance, medical and dental insurance, and a college fund for each child vesting at age 25. My name appears nowhere in the documents. Constance knows a benefactor exists. She does not know it is me. She sends thank you letters to the Trust's post office box. Sometimes there are drawings from Chloe inside. Wobbly elephants mostly. I keep every one. Gerald Pwitt and I have dinner together every few weeks now. He is 70 years old. He lost a daughter to addiction a decade ago and carries that grief the way veterans carry old injuries, quietly but always present. He told me once that protecting those children that night was the first time in years he had felt genuinely useful. He is the most honourable person I have ever known. He asks nothing of me except honest conversation and the occasional pour of a decent red wine. 3 months after the trial, sitting on my balcony watching the Charlotte skyline turn amber at dusk, I received a message from Darnell's prison account. He said, "Please answer," that he was scared, that things were hard inside. He said our mother had told him I had money and asked me to put something on his commissary. He said we were family. He asked if I remembered catching fireflies together in the backyard as children. He said I owed him at least that much. I read it once. I felt nothing. Not anger, not guilt, not that old familiar ache of wanting him to love me correctly. I felt the way you feel when you come across an old receipt for something you returned years ago. It was simply a record of a transaction that had long since closed. I placed the phone face down on the table.